Welcome to this webinar about sustainability reporting, and this is specifically on the topic of communication. So to kick us off, we can start with a little personal introduction. So my name is Anya, and I am the marketing lead at Nexio projects. I am originally from South Africa. My background is in international business and communication with lots of travel and experience abroad during my studies at the Rotterdam Business School. Since graduating, I've been active in marketing and communication. I started out in the software as a service industry, but I was really looking for a bit more meaning in my career, which led me to sustainability. I specialize in tailor-made marcom strategies, and my main philosophy as a marketer is to create value adds value. So that's a bit about me. Cesar, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Certainly. Welcome, everybody. I am Cesar Carreño. I am originally from Ecuador, where I'm also German by double nationality. I am the team lead for climate change services here at Nexio projects. I am an agro-industrial engineer from background. I have a master in project management. I have a master in international material flow management as well. And my main area of expertise is climate change and greenhouse gas management. Happy to have you here.
Very nice. So let's have a look at some of the topics we're going to discuss today. We're going to start off with some context, basically the paradigm at which we look at sustainability reporting. We're going to discuss the different elements of a sustainability report, some common challenges, and some best-in-class examples that hopefully will inspire you for your own sustainability reporting. So let's start with some context. Who are we? Nexio Projects is an international sustainability firm. We advise companies on their sustainability journey, and our mission is to accelerate the transition from compliance to purpose. So our services range from EcoVadis and B Corp support, also writing your sustainability report. And Cesar, like you said, heads up our climate change team. Perhaps, Cesar, you can share some of the areas you focus on.
Certainly, thank you so much. So my main tasks are first to build the climate team appropriately so we can serve our customers with the highest level of quality. We help businesses to stick to the Paris Agreement. It all starts with measurement. That's a fact that you cannot manage what you have not measured. And from there on, you can develop your climate roadmap. We support with the carbon footprint assessment, climate gap analysis, science-based targets, supporting for Scope 3 assessment, supporting on data management, etc., etc. And as well, on top of that, we support you with your climate neutrality certification process. So we are here to assist you on all of your climate change related activities for your corporate organization and family.
So that's a little bit about us, but this is a sustainability reporting webinar, and we're nothing without data. So we just want to set the scene for you a little bit. The graph on your right shows a clear trend in sustainability reporting. Flashback 10 years ago, and this was still a rare occurrence, but today it's pretty much standard practice to report on ESG topics. On top of that, we're also seeing a trend of increased standardization and consolidation of reporting frameworks globally as we work towards the 1.5 degree heating goal, in which the private sector, of course, has a very large part to play. So in terms of how reporting ties into the bigger picture, if you don't report on something, how do you measure improvement? Reporting helps stakeholders also make decisions and understand the role that companies play in the wider ESG space. So this clear trend just shows that sustainability reporting is becoming more and more important and the value of it. Cesar, what do you think of these numbers? What is missing maybe to get the non-reporters to join in on this trend?
So for me, the key factor that will mobilize all of those organizations which are not reporting, number one is that the reports need to be actionable. And of course, broaden information to allow these different organizations to report in a very systematized way. As of now, maybe it is the lack of massification of these standards. Maybe it could be that another component, these organizations are completely detached on what is needed currently in the market. Although there are several ways that this can be approached, there should be a consolidated union of concepts to support these different organizations. Massification of the principles is the key.
Totally agree. So to get us started, we also would love to hear from you. So I'm going to launch a poll. So when it comes to sustainability reporting, which stakeholders are you addressing? Who would you like to read your sustainability report? I'm going to launch the poll. So is that employees or future employees, analysts, shareholders, your investors, your customers, your business relationships, so suppliers, NGOs, or is there a stakeholder group that we're not addressing here? And if that is the case, please let us know in the chat. We want to make this webinar as interactive as we possibly can and also as valuable. So yeah, let us know which stakeholders you would be addressing with your sustainability report. I'm going to give it a couple minutes just so that everyone has a chance to respond to the poll. We would love to hear from you. I still see people voting, so that's great to see. We have a responsive bunch with us today. I see in the chat also banks, it being a legal requirement, resale partners, other interested parties, the media. So I see that most of our attendees have responded, so I'm gonna end the poll and I will share the results. So Cesar, is this what you expected?
Certainly. Customers can drive good behavior in reporting data related to social impact, governance, environment, etc. So it is the company's, businesses' duty to respond to the expectations of the customers. So for me, they are the key stakeholders in this process. So yeah.
Yeah, super interesting to see. I'm gonna stop sharing those results. Okay. And then an interesting report that we want to share with you. So the University of Vienna recently published this report where they looked at the readers of annual reports specifically. So it's interesting to note that employees are among the top readers of these reports, next to analysts, applicants, students, and shareholders. Knowing your audience can really help you shape the contents of your report. So if this is something that you're unaware of, it's an important factor to consider. And when it comes to the topics that are of top interest, sustainability ranks in the top 3. So it kind of supports the claim that we made earlier that ESG reporting is becoming more and more important, of course. So now that we've set the scene, let's discuss the actual sustainability report. And this, of course, can be different from organization to organization, but we've tried to make it as inclusive as possible. Before we look at the different elements of a sustainability report, let's first discuss the principles of sustainability reporting. So here we're citing 2 different sources. Accountability is a global sustainability standards firm, and they provide 4 principles: inclusivity, materiality, responsiveness, and impact. The GRI has very similar standards. So they discuss impact, material topics, due diligence, and stakeholder. Although they have different names, they're basically discussing the same thing. So inclusivity pertains to a organization's obligation to actively identify stakeholders and enable their participation in establishing material topics. Materiality pertains to the material topics for an organization, which are then also the most important to report on. And like I said earlier, we have a webinar where we deep dive specifically into materiality. So if you're interested in having a look at that one, please let us know. Responsiveness basically refers to governance. So organizations should act transparently on material sustainable topics and their related impacts, which brings us to impact. So organizations should monitor, measure, and be accountable for how their actions affect ESG topics. So mitigating the risk of negative impacts and improving positive impacts. Then if we look at the GRI side of things, you can kind of see the overlap, starting with impact, material topics, due diligence, which then comes down to how organizations act on the topics that are most material for them. And again, that stakeholder engagement and involvement, which really is key. So now that we understand the principles of sustainability reporting, what are the elements of sustainability reports? So from a high level point of view, what should be included in your report? Generally speaking, you should start with an introduction. It should cover material topics, include reference to a or multiple standards and frameworks. Your impacts will then take up the majority of the report, looking at the different pillars of ESG and corporate sustainability. And lastly, the report should say something about your goals and your strategy moving forward. So let's start with an introduction. According to GRI standards, these would be your general disclosures. So this will give you more information on what to report on in this first section. So you can also give more information about your company DNA by stating your mission, vision, and values, give insight into your overall operations. And it's not uncommon for the report to include a letter from management, either the CEO or managing partners, that kind of addresses the beginning of your report and also sets the scene, just like we did in the beginning of this webinar. So this is an example of what that could look like. So you could include different, you could highlight different parts of your company history. You can address your mission, vision, and values to add context to the contents of the rest of your report. And like I said, not uncommon to include a letter to stakeholders. So this gives you an idea of what that first chapter could look like. Then we move on to materiality. So after you've set the scene for your report, it's time to get into materiality. Materiality, as earlier stated, relates to identifying and prioritizing the most relevant sustainability topics, taking into account your effect on each of these topics. So here we have an example of the materiality matrix from GRI and also how it's been implemented by one of our customers, Ingresa. So they identify the topics that are most important to their stakeholders, as well as the effect that your company has on these topics. Cesar, do you want to tell us more about frameworks and standards?
Certainly. Of course, here you can see a compilation of the main frameworks and standards, which we have consolidated from our previous webinar. Maybe some of you attended the previous webinar. It was quite interesting when we explored what were the main topics that are cross-cut across all of these different standards, what were the similarities, what were the differences. But of course, we need to differentiate and try to consolidate the whole concept of what is the basis of the development of these different standards, not what it needs to be shared. Maybe they derive from the triple bottom line, maybe they derive from the climate approach, from the environment, governance, CSR, ESG, different topics, all of them combined. After the chapter about materiality, of course, the report can address any relevant standard or framework, which is directly related to transparency. And of course, this overview showcases the ones that are mostly used. In our previous webinar, we provided a detailed description of each of these standards and frameworks, but this is a general overview on with the whys, the who, the what, and the how are they linked. And of course, we can mention here the SDGs, which goals you address in your operations, particularly the UN Global Champions committed to the UNGC means that you need to commit your organization to communicate the progress and submission of an annual report. Then you have GRI, which is one of the most commonly used in sustainability report. You have CDP, which focuses mainly on environmental issues, climate issues, but is often requested by investors with a desired score and rating. And of course, the TCFD, which is being adopted by the UK as of April and potentially also in the US. This one mainly focuses on climate change risks. So this is a general overview of these frameworks and standards for you to have a perspective on what is needed and what is currently being reported.
Thank you for that overview, Cesar. And just for everyone who's curious about the details about the standards and frameworks, we do also have an ebook that covers 10 reporting standards and frameworks. And if you let Margarita know in the chat, I'm sure that she can provide you with a link where you can download that one. Now, before we move on, we have another poll. Cesar?
Yes. Which framework or standard do you use in your sustainability report? Please let us know. It will be key for us to see which one are you using and if it matches the requirements that the standards are asking from you to be reported. You can see the poll here, and we open the table for you to assist us here. We have highlighted, of course, the standards, but we are very interested in to hear what is relevant to your organization.
Yeah, so we've set it up that you can select one. So please select the one that is or will become the most important to your organization. I see already a bunch of votes coming in. And of course, there are a multitude of other reporting standards and frameworks that might not be included in this poll. So if another one is most important to you, please don't hesitate to let us know in the chat. We would love to know as well. I see one already mentioned that I expected to come up, which is B Corp, and another one, EcoVadis, which is also a familiar one for us, of course. I'm going to give a couple more minutes for people to answer. Cesar, what do you think will be the most voted on standard or framework?
I'm expecting GRI and CDP to be headlining this, but let's see how it goes.
I think there might also be a couple of viewers in our webinar who haven't picked a standard or framework yet. I know it's also a common challenge for companies to struggle with what standard or framework to report on. So I think I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And then together we can look at the results. So you were not wrong, Cesar. GRI is definitely among the top voted, and also the SDGs, which is a common reporting framework as well. Any surprises here?
I'm seeing that TCFD is actually getting momentum, even more than CDP here, from what I can see.
Yeah, I think it might be due to our UK viewers who will have to report against the TCFD. I'm surprised that no one voted on CSRD yet. I know it only comes into effect next year, but I know that a lot of companies are preparing for this one as well. But we can move on to the chapters about impact, and I'm going to hand the word over to you, Cesar, to talk about environment.
Thank you so much, Angie. Well, this is the area where I thrive: environment, climate, transparency, etc. So, of course, the whole process for the ESG and the whole concept for the ESG reporting procedure is to highlight any factor which is non-financial to enhance the assessment of material risks for further investments, or at least for acquisition in different type of businesses, operations, etc. No, and then you would say, okay, but is ESG the same as CSR? Not really. Both terms relate to social responsibilities of business, but while CSR holds business accountable for the social commitment in a qualitative manner, ESG helps to measure or quantify the outcome of such social efforts in general. So if we start by the E on ESG, this is the environment part. In this part, you should report and you should cover the impact on the environment and also your strategy or overall strategy in relation to your material topics. The environmental strategy, for instance, if you are a manufacturing company, this is where you discuss your materials. How do you deal with waste and your supply chain? So it's important to take into account the whole life cycle of your material, your raw material, and the main output or production of your company. If you are talking about your climate strategy, you are talking about your greenhouse gases emissions and the effect that these have in the climate change particular pillar. You start comparing to yourself on a yearly basis to see what is the progress. Normally, the trend is that the emissions should be going down, not up. If you talk about CSR initiatives, of course, this provides clarity on the different initiatives that you have taken to manage your impact on the environment as a whole. At every step of the way, of course, you can focus on the different principles, and you should focus on the different principles of materiality, impact, stakeholder, and due diligence. But what is material for your organization in terms of environmental impact? Do you know? Are you aware? Have you already defined what is material to your organization? What type of impact do you have? You need to develop a set of KPIs for you to measure this type of impact. Which stakeholders are affected by this impact? You need to do a mapping or a screening to identify the main stakeholders who receive both positive and negative impact. And what actions is your organization taking to manage these impacts, particularly the negative ones, and of course, enhance or even strengthen the positive ones. So this is the whole context for the E part of the ESG reporting. Can we move to the next slide? Let's go to the next part, society, the S of ESG. Of course, it has a lot to do particularly with the fact that either organization needs to quantify the net effect of an activity, financial activity particularly, from the organizations on individuals or families or the whole society well-being. Social impact can be a positive change that works to address an existing social challenge. That is even the added value. It's not enough not to affect the stakeholders, but also to enhance their way of living in some way. So this is the added value that you have to the social impacts. Remember, it's not only, okay, I'm not affecting, I'm not doing anything. That's become more, let's say, more neutral or inert, but it is important to help them to thrive. So there need to be some connection within your business and the most, let's say, vulnerable groups of the society or the stakeholders which are surrounding your organization. So you have different tools to measure this social impact. You can use the logic approach evaluation program. You can use the social return on investment, and you can do account and audit as well. Those are next steps, of course. But how can you measure which indicators, which lines should you use to measure their social impact? Of course, you can use the realistic reformation model. You need to list your performance indicators, your silent performance indicators. You need to collect and analyze data. You need to put your results to use. What do you communicate? What for? Is it for replication? Is it for pure communication? Is it for compliance? How do you communicate your social impact measurements? And of course, you need to claim your social impact. What is your responsibility? What is the positive, let's say, footprint that you are leaving within the stakeholders in the society and the social realm overall. Next slide, please. Now, moving to the G part of the ESG reporting. Of course, this is very important because it works directly with the governance of the different organizations. The GRI standard 200 and 400 explain how to report on economic and further social impact. But of course, you need to think of topics like business ethics in both internal and external initiatives. This chapter focuses mainly on the principles of due diligence and responsiveness. Organizations in general should act transparently on material sustainability topics and all of their related topics. No? Responsiveness is an organization's timely and relevant reactions to material sustainability topics and their related impacts. Due diligence refers mostly to the process through which an organization identifies, privates, mitigates, and accounts, or how it addresses potential impacts. But of course, all of this involves analysis or evolution of code of business conduct, risk and crisis management, supply chain management, etc., etc. The materiality score, of course, aims to assess the company's ability to identify the sources of long-term value creation, understanding the link between long-term issues and the business case, developing long-term metrics, and transparently report these items publicly. Again, you need to apply different principles. What is material for your organizations in terms of societal impact? Are you supporting vulnerable communities? Why are you supporting these particular communities? It's because they receive the most heavy or most burdensome impact from your organization. What type of impact do you have? What do you measure? Maybe is air quality. Maybe you are affecting, polluting I don't know, watersheds, et cetera, you need to start realizing what is the type of impact that you have, which stakeholders are affected by this particular impact, and what actions is your organization taking to manage this impact. All of these will be the result of a behavioral change, of a policy change, of a governance change, and this starts inside your house. So please take the steps in-house so later on can be reflected in your surroundings. Next slide, please. Anja, here the floor is yours. How can we move forward?
Thank you, Cesar, for that overview of ESG. I think it's very clear that the 4 principles need to reign through all of the chapters of your report, and it's similar for the final chapter of your sustainability report, which can focus on your strategy and your targets and commitments. So the contents of your report should be actionable, and this is an example of how you could approach this. Your reports could outline a roadmap with key milestones that you set out for your organization. You could also include an action plan, bringing back the concept of materiality and what you're going to do with those topics. So you can highlight milestones from the year before, but also set ambitions moving forward. Interestingly enough, I spoke to one of our clients recently, and they had just published their first sustainability report. And the sustainability manager said that by publishing the report, their future sustainability strategy was formulated because it identified their material topics, their progress so far, but also the negative impacts that they were having and their desire to mitigate this moving forward. So it made clear to management as well how deeply sustainability is embedded in all of the departments and the company's operations. So we created this slide to give you an idea of how you could approach this, and hopefully to inspire you on how to communicate about your steps moving forward. So those were the elements of your sustainability report. And next, we would like to address some of the common challenges that are faced by organizations. But first, I'm going to hand over the word to Cesar to talk about the evolution of sustainability reporting.
Thank you so much, Angie. But before we go into the challenges, I wanted to highlight how sustainability reporting has evolved over time, of course. There are different layers that have been added and modifications that have happened throughout this entire process. As we saw in the beginning, around 10 years ago, there were 20% of different organizations reporting on ESG matters. Of course, sustainability reports back then were mainly a marketing tool to gain customers, to communicate with other interested parties, but not because of compliance and not because it was embedded under the DNA of the different organizations. No? But nonetheless, it communicated positive initiatives, which was a very good first step. With the introductions of specific guidelines on measurement and materiality, non-financial reporting has evolved to more serious matters, and of course, it should include all of the different and relevant stakeholders within the process. No, all organizations should strive to embed sustainability as a core pillar of their operations, and of course, in their reporting. So doing so, it will directly support sound decision making, transparent decision making, well-informed decision making, and both internally as well as for other stakeholders, let's say potential investors and customers. So this is just not just a matter of communication, it's a matter of trust, it's a matter of openness, it's a matter of transparency, and of course, it's a matter of embedding sustainability as one of the core pillars of our different operations. Next slide, please.
So before we together address some of the challenges that we see with our customers, but also in the market in general, we would love to know which challenges you face when it comes to sustainability reporting. So I'm going to launch another poll. And here we've highlighted some of the challenges that we see. And I would like to ask you, which is the biggest challenge you face, the one that is most prominent within your organization? And then we can discuss some of the challenge and how to overcome them, give some advice. So please let us know which challenge you commonly face within your organization. Cesar, do you want to take a guess at which one will be the most prominent?
I would say lack of clarity might be for those which are already deciding where to go. If they don't have enough information, it can be very challenging to make an informed decision.
I'm going to give a couple more seconds for people to respond to the poll. We would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, while we wait, I also want to encourage everyone to make use of the Q&A box if you have any questions for us, and then we'll make sure to tackle them during the end of this webinar. After we look at challenges, we will look at some best-in-class examples to hopefully inspire you in your sustainability reporting journey. And then we will move on to the Q&A section of this webinar, where you get to ask us all of your questions. So I see the numbers have stabilized. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, also share the results. So there is one clear winner, which is the gathering of data is clearly the biggest challenge for the people we have with us today. And I'm going to close this. Now, let's have a look at the challenges that we've identified. First and foremost, we also know that companies struggle with gathering of data, but the best reports are data-driven and show real impact with proof of that impact. And we realize that that can be a challenge. And I think the main way to overcome this is really to get all of the departments within your organization involved that can contribute to the gathering of this data, and also to set clear goals from the beginning. If you don't know what you want to track or what you need to track, then it'll be super hard to gather the information and put it into a report. So if you start now, you can start gathering the data throughout the year and publish them in your sustainability report next year, if you haven't started doing that yet. Cesar, which challenge do you think you see most often as well with our clients, apart from gathering data?
So from gathering data, particularly, this is directly related to gathering data, there is some specific pillar. Reporting greenhouse gas emissions can be a constraint for several organizations. We have never done so. And for those which are already on the path of reporting climate-related information, when they need to report scope 3, which is outside of their scope, outside of their operations, outside of their influence, it's very difficult to report those in a very structured way. Or maybe if they need to report on intensity per unit of production, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be a very complex value to report and to disaggregate at some point. And the most difficult part is that climate reporting, greenhouse gases reporting is repeated throughout all of the standards. So this is a big challenge.
And do you have any advice for our viewers that face this challenge on how to overcome this data issue?
Yes, of course. You can certainly start with baby steps, try to gather information as much as possible, but not only gather the information, organize and clean information. You need to set up a specialized data management system, or at least a data management authority within your own organization, which later on can be used for whoever wants to use this information, because all of the climate related information is directly related to energy demand. So energy managers can use this information, facility managers can use this information, climate and sustainability managers can use this information. So it's key. Do not decouple the information of energy from climate or from efficiency or from profitability. It's all related. So it's very important to define a team that manages data internally.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting your team members involved, getting other departments involved, getting management involved really will be the key in getting solid data from within your organization and then being able to report on it. So then we'd like to move on to some final inspiration, and we'll look at best-in-class examples of recent sustainability reports and what we like about them. Hopefully, they will serve as a source of inspiration, and you can have a look at how some of the other organizations approach this. And I want to start off by saying that we will publish also a sustainability reporting guide, which will guide you through all of the things that you wish you knew before you started writing your sustainability report, and also include best-in-class examples. So we will share this guide with you in the follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow, which will also contain the recording of this webinar and all of the slides so that you can have another look. So I want to start with Solveig. which is a very large chemicals company. And they published this report in 2020 or about 2020. And the reason we like it is because it's an integrated report. So it looks at both the financial performance as well as their ESG performance. The report itself is incredibly data driven. So they really have put in the effort to gather accurate and strong data. They also really apply the 4 principles within their reporting. And on top of that, they've incorporated video in their reports. They've turned their integrated reports into an interactive webpage. And in the contents of the report, they really focus on collaboration. So I would encourage you to have a look, but it'll also be referenced in the reporting guide that we will share with you afterwards. And then when it comes to the consulting space, ERM is really an amazing example of what a sustainability report should look like and could contain. So if you're struggling to come up with the different topics that should be covered in your reports, ERM has an extensive reports that could serve as inspiration. And on top of that, they've incorporated both UNGC as well as TCFD and GRI in their report. And if you look at their materiality analysis, it can be seen as best practice. Then we have DSM, which is a health, nutrition, and bioscience company. What is interesting about this report is that they've been reporting since 2018. So they make a year-over-year comparison in how they've improved, which is really interesting for comparability. In their report, they also split people, planet, and profit. So you can clearly see what topics in terms of those pillars are material to them and how they've affected them. And another beautifully data-driven report. And it also has evidence of activities and external assurance. So they've had third-party review on the contents of the report, which validates obviously what you report on. And then lastly, so we've covered 3 very large companies who have been reporting for quite a while. And I also wanted to include a report, which is a first-time reporter, which is Too Good To Go. They're a software as a service company. Their report is very different from the 3 earlier reports that I mentioned. So they have less than 30 pages. They really focus on an element of storytelling, and it's very conversational, which I think tailors to their audience. It's a PDF report, not a web page like our previous ones, but it has a very personal feel. And although they focus on conversation and storytelling, it doesn't come at the cost of data. So you'll see that they have beautiful data visualization throughout the report. And they include a section where they discuss the outcome of their B Corp impact assessment, and they take you along with them in their journey. So I just wanted to mention these 4 reports to give you a sense of inspiration, and we will, like I said, follow up. See that someone never receives the following up emails of the webinar. Shelly will be sure to fix that so that everyone can access the recording, the slides, as well as this new guide from us. So we want to end the webinar with some key takeaways, some of the learnings that you can hopefully take with you after viewing this webinar. So our first advice would be to really follow the 4 principles of sustainability reporting, and I'd like to repeat them. So they're inclusivity, materiality, responsiveness, and impact according to accountability, but very similarly, GRI states impact. So what is the effect that your organization has on your material topics? Which leads us into one of the main pillars of sustainability reporting, which is identifying your material topics, involving your stakeholders in the identification of these topics, and the due diligence, so your governance around your effect. Of course, we also want to encourage you to be creative and authentic. Not every report should look the same and contain the same. Be realistic about the contents of your report. And yeah, be creative with how you display them. Cesar, what would you say are your main takeaways here?
So for me, if we are talking about the key takeaways, I would say to be transparent is key, particularly in the communication process. No, transparency about your journey and who you are, where you are, how do you communicate this information, how much information are you communicating, what information is relevant, what information is key, what really information is timely. It's important to assess this in advance when communicating your sustainability report. No, and moving to number 4, goal alignment, of course, to align all of your goals with your pillars and the framework for everybody to understand and is able to benchmark your dedication and ambition towards the process of reporting. So it's important that for all of the attendants that are participating in this webinar to understand what is the main goal of the organization, particularly as a business, and how can you further enhance and strengthen these objectives through developing a sustainability plan and how to communicate the sustainability process. Yep. I give the ball back to you, Angie.
Thank you. Yes, and from a marketing and communication point of view, I would encourage you to tell a story. Although data is incredibly important, it's also an opportunity to add more context and explain your actions and decisions, and to cater the message towards your audience. So this comes back to the readership of annual reports and of sustainability reports. So make sure to identify who you cater your report to, and the different messaging that you approach with that. And before we move on, I would also like to ask to please let us know what you think about our webinar. So Margarita will share a link so that you can give feedback on the contents of this webinar, but also to let us know if there are other topics that you would like us to address with future webinars. And to close us off, I would like to do another little poll. So what kinds of services are you looking for in terms of sustainability reporting? So like we said, Nexio Projects is a sustainability consulting firm. We specialize in supporting organizations on their sustainability journey. And we would love to know if there are any specific services that you are looking for from our side, or how we can support you in your journey. And I'm just going to give some time for people to answer this poll, of course. And then we can move on. We'll give you some details about the next upcoming webinar in this series. So this is the 3rd webinar in our sustainability reporting series, but we have 2 more to come. And we also have an event coming up in March with EcoVadis, who is our partner. It's called Sustain. And if you would like to register, we can share that link with you as well. And just again, encouraging everyone to make use of the Q&A box. I see there are already a couple questions, so we will tackle those in a couple minutes. And let us know what you think of our webinars by way of feedback form. Just going to give it a couple more seconds. Take a sip of water. And then we can dive into the questions. So let's see here. So these are the events and webinars that we have coming up. So on March 14th and 15th, we have Sustain together with EcoVadis. We will be present at the event as sponsors, but a very exciting event to talk about impact and how procurement and sustainability leaders can affect that. And then we have the 2 next webinars in our series. So we will pick that up in April with a panel session with some of our clients where they discuss their sustainability journey, and a recap and live Q&A at the end of April with myself and also my colleague Thomas. So then I think it's time for the Q&A part of our webinar. And for that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that we can tackle some of the questions. Let me just pull those up here. We already have a couple questions. We'll start with the first question, and Cesar, if you want, you can tackle it. So the first question is, when would a materiality assessment not be applicable? I can also take it. I would actually encourage every company to always include a materiality assessment. This is just incredibly important in identifying those topics that you need to address in your sustainability report, but also in your overall sustainability strategy. And then we have another question, which can be a little bit challenging. How do you encourage your clients who have bad results from reporting to still publish? How do we keep companies honest in their reporting?
So I would say for me, it's important that the companies need to be transparent and doesn't take it as a bad, let's say, a bad result, but as a lesson learned. You can share that instead of saying, yeah, we did poorly this, you can say, we have learned that this does not work very well. You are communicating exactly the same thing, but it's a lesson learned for you, because the idea is that this bad result does not repeat next year. And if you only communicate the positive aspects, you don't have a benchmark to compare to. So process or evolution or enhancement on your goals, etc., will be very, very difficult to assess if you don't show what you have learned from the previous year as well. No, so I would say it's not what you communicate, but how you communicate.
Yeah, no, fully agree. I think an interesting example of this that Tommy Chocolonely recently released, that they have identified cases of child labor in their supply chain, and they've been open and transparent about it, and also about their actions moving forward in wanting to reduce these cases. So I think it's a matter of choosing to be transparent and what you're going to do with that information, and elements of governance comes in with it as well. And then we have another question. Can you remind us what you mean by materiality? Concrete examples would help. So materiality really pertains to the topics that are most relevant to your organization, both from an impact perspective as well as a stakeholder perspective. So doing a materiality assessment means getting your stakeholders involved, asking them what topics they care most about, and doing an internal analysis to identify those topics that you have most impact on. Cesar, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, of course. And this also relates in several aspects on pillars. There is materiality, which is assessed as well in the GHG protocol, which is related to the emission report with the ISO 40064. So materiality defines what is relevant to your specific pillar or activity, and how closely linked or related is to your outcomes, and what is the, let's say, the level of power in the operations or the outcome you have on it. So materiality is used throughout different concepts, but it always means the same: how closely linked or how relevant it is for your activities, or for the outcome, or for the result that you will perform.
Exactly. And then we have a question from Samuel pertaining to scope 3. So I'm gonna hand that one over to you, Cesar. Are you aware of companies reporting on their scope 3 emissions? If so, approximately what percentage of total reporting?
Well, it is true that not all of the companies are reporting on their scope 3, but I am fully aware that several companies are at least trying to measure their scope 3. Why the reporting of scope 3 is so complex? Because scope 3 can easily take 80% of your emissions. When you report, so you will see gigantic, but definitely the level of influence that the organizations have of their scope 3 can be rather limited, although not all of the companies report scope 3. I know about several companies that are measuring their scope 3, and they're taking the very first steps to do something about it.
Well, then we have another question on how to roll out results to marketing and sales teams. I'm guessing this means the findings of your report and how to communicate that. So the best way, I think, especially if you're a first-time reporter, is to gather all of your data, start writing the report, and to work with perhaps a design team if you have someone in-house, or you can look for outside support with that, to put the outcomes together in a PDF report that you can then share. Again, it really comes down to identifying the key stakeholders that you would want to address with your report, and sharing it in a way that is digestible for them. So I see a lot of companies these days who have a web page specifically on their website dedicated to sustainability, where they communicate their efforts. So I'm hoping that answers your question. If not, feel free to follow up. Let's see, another question. Is it not important to include our actions and impacts, both planetary and social, in the report so that it's more scientific and context-based? It's related to the thresholds. So we have the planetary thresholds. This is something that you could, I guess, apply in your reporting, is to incorporate your effect on these thresholds within the report. Cesar, what do you think?
I would say yes, up to a certain level, but you need to be very careful. If you start to communicate scientific information in a way that is only accessible to those which closely work with this type of data, you will generate more confusion than rather than informing a lot of stakeholders. So you need to be very careful on how to communicate this type of information related to the thresholds.
Yeah, I think if you would choose to do so, you would have to introduce it in the beginning of your report to add a lot of context and set the scene as to how the contents of your report affect them. And then another question for you, Cesar, what tool would you recommend to start with greenhouse gas data collection for scope 1 and 2? A simple Excel or a more sophisticated tool?
Well, that is a risky question, because if you are, let's say, a cement company, a company that produces cement and has different facilities in different parts of the country, an Excel tool might just create more confusion. So you need to look for more, let's say, specialized support. An Excel tool, yes, but you created by somebody which is a specialist, not done by somebody which is just starting to work with greenhouse gases. It's much more complex. But nonetheless, if you are a small SMEs, a small medium enterprise only, which offers only services, it's a real easy exercise to do a data collection template for this particular purpose. Excel is a very, very powerful tool in very capable hands, but it can create more confusion in people which is just starting. So please assess yourself. Are you a huge company, huge organizations, lots of facilities, etc.? If then that is the case, it will be complex. If it's smaller, then of course it's 100% doable.
Thank you for that. We have another question with regards to the contents of the report. Do we have to include the risks and opportunities with regards to the material aspects of this that we've identified in the sustainability report?
I would say so, yes, because identifying the risks, particularly those which are a risk for infrastructure, reputational risks, political risks, financial risks, etc., is very important, because it's a potent, a robust tool for future investors, for future shareholders, etc., and will enhance preparedness of the organization on the short and long term, because policies can change from one year to the other. Let's say the geographical or let's say infrastructure risk can change from one year to the other, depending on how the weather will behave. So you need to identify and include these to inform at least your shareholders.
Yeah, it's also an opportunity to address how you mitigate risks and how you make use of opportunities. So I would definitely recommend including your governance actions around the identified risks and opportunities. And then I think we're all set. I don't see any open questions more in the Q&A box. So I think we can close this webinar. So thank you everyone who participated. And once again, we will follow up with the recording as well as the slides and the link to the sustainability reporting guide with all of the information to hopefully get you on board with sustainability reporting. And thank you as well to you, Cesar, for co-hosting this webinar with me. I hope you all got a bunch of value out of this.
Yeah, of course. Always happy to participate. I understand that sometimes it's challenging you to understand what standard you wish to use, how do you wish to communicate, but it's important to share information, and we can share information based on actual experiences that we have had.
Yes, always happy to help. So thank you everyone, and have a great afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. And we would love to welcome you to another webinar in the future.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Adios.
Goodbye.